Welcome into the latest edition of ESPN FC. I'm Dan Thomas, joined by Craig Burley here in the studio. Later on, we'll look ahead to the return of domestic football across Europe. But we'll kick things off with some interesting quotes attributed to Thomas Tuchel. Just a reminder, of course, they went to Serbia, they won 5-0. They played very well. There was no, for example, Cole Palmer, Trent Alexander-Arnold, no Foden, or Jude Bellingham. And it's Jude Bellingham that people are suggesting that maybe Thomas Tuchel was talking about in the interviews afterwards. This is what he had to say. There was no attitude after a mistake. There was no frustration. There was no waving. There was no eyeballing. There was no bad words. It was just a team ready to work and put 90 minutes effort in. If a big player misses out on a tournament, we need to have solutions. If he misses a camp, we need to have solutions. We have to focus on the guys who are available and who are ready to be the best versions of themselves and the best teammates possible. And this is what we did. Now, for more on this, Nedum joins us, but I want to start with Mark Ogden. Mark, Tuchel knows what he's doing here, doesn't he?
Yeah, so just for a bit of context, these comments are made after the Serbia game, but the England manager will generally have a separate briefing with the national newspaper journalists. So all the back pages in the UK today were of this story because Tuchel's had a private session and he's been asked a question about the players that weren't there, could they get back as the team? He wasn't specifically asked about Bellingham, but those quotes, you'd suggest that, you know, I never see Trent Alexander-Arnold or Foden or Cole Palmer doing the things that Tuchel is talking about, the eyeballs, the frustrations. That's Jude Bellingham. I mean, he's mentioned it before in the sense that, as we know, he called his behaviour repulsive last season, and he apologised for that. He said that's what his mother felt that Jude Bellingham was on the pitch, not himself. But still, it was a strong word. But, well, repulsive is probably overdoing it, but we know at times that Jude Bellingham's behaviour on the pitch is unsavoury. It's not very pleasant. So there's an issue there. The issue with Jude Bellingham is that, you know, he's one of England's best players. He's a moments player. He scored a big goal in the Euros, but he's not particularly popular within the camp. We know that there are issues with the FA. I've been told a few times that Jude Bellingham's parents, or certainly his dad, is an issue. He's a challenging personality, shall we say. We saw it recently with the situation with Joe Bellingham at Dortmund, where Dortmund had to tell families and connections not to go near the tunnel again after he was trying to tell the manager that he wasn't happy with how he'd taken Joe off the pitch. So a few things coming together. And we know that Thomas Tuchel, when he was at PSG, he really didn't enjoy having so-called superstars in the sense of Mbappe and Neymar. He's very much a coach who wants a team rather than a standout player, a player that creates the headlines and takes the headlines and thinks he's bigger than the team. Now, is that Jude Bellingham? Sometimes, not all the time. And I think when the World Cup comes around, I'd imagine if it's like a quarter-final against Germany, you'd want Jude Bellingham in the team. But I think Thomas Tuchel is sending a message here to Jude Bellingham that we know you've got great talent, but we know you can be a little bit over the top sometimes. So we can win without you. If you want to be back in the team, there are certain things you have to do and certain things you shouldn't do. So it's a veiled threat to Jude Bellingham that just tone it down a little bit.
A little bit early for that, is it not? I mean, you are allowed to be frustrated. I mean, he hasn't played well. He's injured at the moment. He hasn't played well for England. He hasn't played well for Real Madrid for quite some time, in a team that struggled last year. And his frustrations in La Liga sometimes boil over with referees, but you're allowed to be frustrated as a player. You're allowed to throw your arms up, aren't you? I mean, I think Thomas Tuchel's been a bit premature here. I mean, they've beaten Serbia. It was a great result, but it's a qualifier. What does that mean? Not a lot. England will qualify. And you might be sending a message, but you have to be careful you don't ostracise. Unless you're absolutely 100% sure, you're not really bothered about using this player. Because you may need Jude Bellingham. If he hits his straps at Real Madrid before the World Cup and he's a bit more than annoyed at your comments, that's a difficult situation. So I think clearly it is aimed at him, but I think Thomas Tuchel's had quite a lot to say for himself with not a lot of great results or performances, the last one apart, in his short tenure as England manager. And I get it with Jude Bellingham. Certainly there's more to come out, and the family situation at Dortmund is embarrassing and all that sort of stuff. But at the end of the day, as a teenager and then at Dortmund, and then as a young man moving to Real Madrid and playing the way he did, he is potential superstar material when he's on his game. And so I think you have to be a little careful here about being a bit of a smart ass, sending a message to a player who could turn against you, and you may need him at the World Cup when the proverbial hits the fan, if that's the case. So I get it. You're a manager, and I'm going to send a message to all my team and all that. But sometimes you have to go back to the well and ask a player to do a job for you. And if you continue to make these sort of insinuations, veiled insinuations about a player, I think it could come back and haunt you.
Nedum?
Yeah, so I think this is interesting, to be honest, because if Bellingham is now learning that this is how the manager perceives him through the press, then that's a far bigger issue. But my belief would be that tough conversation would have already been had, but from Tuchel and Bellingham. You know, they've spoken to each other in the last international break, for example. Probably spoken about the plans for the future, because you know Jude Bellingham is such a big player for England. As Craig said, you know, like, he's somebody who's very much involved in the biggest moments. He's somebody who the crowd are desperate to see as well. And you know, in those instances against teams where they're evenly matched, Bellingham could prove to be the difference. So my concern would only be if he's communicating in that manner. But then also, when we look at Tuchel, he's in a very clear position, probably more clear than any other England manager we've seen in pretty much our lifetimes, and the fact that the World Cup is next year and they have to be successful. But what is success in this instance for them is probably making it to a final.
They're not a great Serbian side at the moment. That being said, if you watched the game, it wasn't about superstars, it was about good movement, it was about good passing, it was about good finishing. Didn't have to do a lot of defending. Here's the issue I have, potentially. If Thomas Tuchel and Jude Bellingham have had a private conversation and Tuchel said, listen, I don't want that from you. This is what I want from you. I want you to be focused. I don't want you to get too frustrated. I want you to believe in me. I believe in you. You're a goal scorer. You're at Real Madrid, and I can rely on you. This is what I want from you. This is how I want you to play. And if Jude Bellingham goes, yeah, I agree. I'm with you. I'm going to roll my sleeves up. I'll sort the injury out. I'm going to get back. I'm going to fight hard to be in the starting 11 and do a job for you. Then I don't have to go to the Mark Ogdens of this world.
Yeah.
I don't have to. I don't have to go for a press briefing. I don't have to go to brief the back page guys, and I don't have to let it out, because I've had that conversation with the player. Because if I've had that conversation with the manager in private, and he's told me the things that he doesn't like about my performances, and I've accepted that, I am not happy off the back of it, if then he goes and gives the press boys a little bit of a headline.
That's exactly what I was going to ask you, Nedum. If you've had that private conversation, why go public with it?
Well, to be honest, we could see this a different way, because the stuff that he said there, he's not specifically mentioned Bellingham, and in some ways, maybe this is messaging to the other players in the squad to almost acknowledge the fact that this is the standard that he's going to try and put forward, because the conversation he's had with Bellingham is probably going to be just between those two. But in terms of a team perspective, he's picked a bunch of players who might not be starting at, say, the World Cup next year, and he's seen them do well, he's praised them, and he's also mentioned those positive traits, which he's trying to say will be the standard going forward. So I think from a messaging standpoint, if it was specifically about Bellingham, I feel like he would address it and say Bellingham. I think Thomas Tuchel is somebody that's not shy in terms of putting forward his true perspective and opinion on things. So I don't think it's necessarily that black and white from my side of things. But I think that messaging for me is more so to the players who've been, and for people to get a feel of how Tuchel wants to run his squad. And as a consequence, if you ask again, say why somebody's dropped, not necessarily just Bellingham, you can say, well, this is the culture that we have, and this is because I said so after this game.
Oggy, obviously Bellingham didn't play against Andorra, where England was slated as well after that game.
Well, that's right, and I think the reality is that when the World Cup comes around, as well as Elliot Anderson did in that game against Andorra and Serbia, it was Andorra, and it was a very weak Serbia side, so we have to put it into some perspective that, Bellingham, when he's fit and playing well, he should be in that team, because, like Craig said, he's one of the best players around. He's a world-class midfielder. But there are issues that behind the scenes which I guess Tuchel knows he needs to correct. That when Bellingham scored the winning goal against Slovakia in the Euros, and he was mouthing off who else, that didn't go down well with some of the players in the camp. And I know that it's a big thing is made in England about media duties. Now, it might be something or nothing to fans, but the situation is that over the years that Bellingham has been there, he's never actually sat down and done any kind of media. And now, the main players in the England squad share it around, and there is a sense that Jude Bellingham has some sort of special treatment, that he's treated as a special case. And if you're a squad that's certainly away for 4 or 5 weeks, you don't need that scenario where there's a player that thinks he's different to everybody else or won't do what everybody else has done. It doesn't help with team spirit or the bonding situation. So there are issues that Tuchel has to correct, and I don't know what he's thinking about when he's saying these things, because it does risk antagonising the player and his family, and he's we have to bear that in mind. players' connections nowadays, families and agents are a very powerful force, and if they want to destabilise this situation, they're more than capable of doing it by briefing people like me or other people like me to get the other side of the story out. So it doesn't tend to end well. But Thomas Tuchel, as we know, throughout his career has been a coach that has kind of relished confrontation, whether it's with his chairman, the owners or players. So it's his style. It's his style to sometimes wind people up and try and get the best out of them, or sometimes he does it because he doesn't like them. So we'll see how it pans out. But if he makes an enemy of Jude Bellingham, that is not a good thing to do before a World Cup.
But I suppose if coming into this job, it's although England obviously haven't won a major tournament since '66, they're always one of the teams that are in the mix, or should be in the mix. So it is one of the more pressurised international jobs. And I suppose in some sense you don't want to make too many enemies, but you don't want to walk away from the job if you're sacked after a bad tournament and think, well, I wish I'd done that, or I wish I'd been stronger there. So, I suppose he's got to do it his way.
To Mark's point, when you were away for the World Cup, would people notice if you're not doing media duties,
Yes.
and you're kind of getting special treatment? How does that dynamic affect
If there's one
things?
player, and we didn't have it in the Scotland squad, to be fair, but we had a lot of guys playing at a high level, but we didn't have any big heads. But if we did, it would have stuck out like a sore thumb. If you're in a hotel for 6 weeks, if you travel pre-tournament to the United States, as we did, for 10 days or 2 weeks for training camp, and then you go back, you spend a couple of days at home, and then you're off to another hotel, as we were in France, if somebody's not sharing the responsibility of the media duties and everything else that comes with playing at a World Cup, it sticks out like a sore thumb, and it annoys the hell out of other senior players. The young players, it doesn't really bother.
Okay.
The young players, they're just in, they're keeping their head down, they might get a game. But the guys that have got 25, 30, 40, 50 caps, who are going, and I didn't mind talking to the media guys, and most of them were good guys, but some people didn't really like it. As Ogden will tell you, some players are less comfortable, they're more guarded, and others are a little bit more free in terms of chatting to some of the journalists. They're not so frightened that they're going to get stitched up and all this sort of thing. And so when somebody's not taking that responsibility and people who are uncomfortable with it are having to go and do it, that annoys people, and that spreads through the squad very, very quickly. And my experience and I haven't seen it much, but my experience of having a big head in an international squad is it really fuels animosity, and that isn't a good situation.
But I imagine not just an international squad, just a domestic squad as well, Nedum. There's only so much you'll put up with. If you're the best player in the team, then obviously it's good to have you within that squad. But if you upset the dynamic of it all, then that balance must be quite difficult to get.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's an interesting position to be in, because if that stuff is true, as Mark said, then it is awkward, because like these interviews and sort of connection with the media and the external world, like that's part of the job. I think that's something that's changed across the last 10, 20, 30 years. At times you might have a sit down with a journalist or something, but these days it's everywhere. It's digital, it's here, it's there, it's this person, it's that person, it's podcasts, and you are one of the faces of that team. So there's going to be a lot of requests put in for people to see you. And if it's a case of, well, no, that means other people essentially have to fill in and do more. And at this stage, we're talking about a media standpoint, but people, for example, who don't pull their weight on the pitch as well, you look at them differently. And I think what makes it more awkward is, like, sometimes, as a player, the people you're talking about, like, some of these are your friends. But if your friend's not doing the work that he should be doing, you ask them, well, why are you not doing it? And they give their reason. Well, that's not a good enough reason. And it also brings you in this position where, to be honest, from my perspective, you look at the manager in a different light. Because managers are very, very set in terms of their principles. This is who we are. This is how we want the club to be. Whether it's club side, national side, whatever. This is how it's going to be. Well, that's for everyone except for this guy. And as soon as it becomes except for this guy, then yeah, there can be a sense of resentment built in. And other people will say, well, if he's not doing that, then I don't need to do it. And then before you know it, it's like a house of cards. Everything just starts to collapse. And in those tough moments, you don't have people sticking up for you. And this, on the pitch, you don't have people doing everything they can to support you. You don't have the same pull in the same direction. And you can create rifts in the camp. Because as Mark said there, who else, that, like from the last Euros, we said who else, or whatever. If that's making people resent him, then when you're on the pitch, you can't help but feel that. You're not playing in a sort of blackout way where you're not even thinking about anything. You're thinking, well, what happens if this guy does well? Will this guy be here? Will that guy be there? And it's not a great position to be in, to be honest. As soon as there's a double standard in football or anywhere, to be honest, in team life, then yeah, you're in trouble.
You'll put up with it if it's You know, if you're in the Argentinian squad that won the World Cup and Lionel Messi's got a bit of a strop and doesn't want you, I haven't got an issue with that because I know he's going to take me to the promised land. There's a fair chance. The problem is if you have, and I'm not suggesting this is the case. If you have a player who is a problem and who is rebellious and difficult behind the scenes, then you have to weigh up what he's doing for you on the field. And then you have to weigh up the worthwhile cause of having him in the squad for the disruption or not having him around the place. Now, if it is Jude Bellingham and he's not performing, that's a question that you have to ask yourself as a manager. But if he's performing on the field, then as a player, you may put up with it. You may suffer it a little bit more if he's digging you out a hole. But if he's not, and he's not pulling his weight, and he's showing some sign of arrogance around the team hotel and around the training ground, that's a massive problem.